Okay, so now we're starting on to Lecture 3, Federalism. And so I want to start off by giving you a definition of federalism, and then we'll go ahead and we'll move on from there. So federalism, the technical definition, is the constitutional division of governing authority between two levels, the national level and the state level. And if you remember when we originally talked about, this is back earlier, when we talked about the options that were available to the framers of the Constitution when they originally started devising the second Constitution of the United States, one of the things that they could have chose between a unitary system in which the national government had all the power. They didn't want to do that because they had their experience with the king. They could have done they wanted to do a confederate system. That was the system under the Articles of Confederation, the one that didn't work. And so ultimately they opted for a federalist system. A federalist system which is what we have now, where the federal government has some power, the national government. When I say national government, federal government, it means the same thing. The national government would have some power, and the state governments would have some power. And so it would be shared, but the national government would be more powerful in some instances. So when we talk about federalism and we talk about the sort of federalist system, oftentimes the way we describe it is in terms of what we call the horizontal distribution of power and then the vertical distribution of power. So horizontal just means side to side, things that are at the same level but side to side, like the bottom of the screen here. This is horizontal. Right, that's horizontal. It's like flat to the ground. Vertical is up or down. Well, let me go over here. Up or down. So that's vertical. That line right there, that's vertical. You'll have to pardon the screaming outside. I don't know if you can hear that. So I want to talk about this in terms of what it means when we talk about federalism and the distribution of power. And so this is going to be extremely high tech. So I'm going to zoom into this little thing I have on the back wall. There you go. Now what you see here is the N at the top left stands for the national government. And then the S at the bottom stands for state governments. And so the top box that has the E, the L, and the J in it, all those things together are the national government. Let me see if I can... Hold on. So when we're talking about the national government, we're referring to, there's the executive branch, there's the legislative branch, and then there's the judicial branch. All of them are part of the national government. So this whole thing here, this thing here, that's all the national government, right? And then down below there, this here, these are the state governments and the power that's given to the states, as you may recall, maybe not, in the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. But we'll talk about that in a sec. That is awful, but that's that's all I got. That's all I got. So when we talk about the horizontal distribution of power, we're talking about the power that's distributed between the power given to the national government that's given to the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. They're all supposed to be what we call co-equal branches. So when we talk about the horizontal distribution of power, we're talking about how power was divided up between the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch at the national level. Vertical, as I said, is up and down. In the vertical distribution of power, when we talk about the vertical distribution of power, we're talking about the powers that were given to the national government versus the power that was given to state governments. Okay? So once again, when we're talking about horizontal distribution of power, we're talking about the power given to the various branches in the national government. And then when we talk about the vertical distribution of power, we're talking about the powers that were given to the national government compared to the powers that were given to the state governments. Okay? So now, let's go back to where we were. And there we go. Okay, the reason that the federal government, go away. There we go. The reason that the framers divided power up so much, the reason that they gave, this is what happens when your office is in the music building. The reason that they gave spread the power between the national government and the state governments, and then also spread it out in the national government, is because the framers were concerned that if anybody had too much power, if there was too much power in the hands of a few people, it would ultimately lead to tyranny. That, like if the president, the executive was given too much power, he would take over and essentially become a king again. And so all the powers that were given to the national government, they gave some to the executive branch, some to the legislative branch, some to the judicial branch. And each one of them had the ability to go ahead and stop the other one from getting too big. And they separated some power between the national government and the state governments, right, as another way to prevent anybody from having too much power. When we talk about federalism, we're primarily talking about the power given to the national government versus the power given to the state governments. Okay? So we're going to start off by talking about the national government and the powers that were given to the national government. The first place that you can find a list of the powers given to the national government is actually in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And there you'll find something that's referred to as the enumerated powers. The enumerated powers. Enumerated sounds like a big word. All it means is the listed powers, the powers that are enumerated, that are listed. Sometimes these are referred to as the expressed powers. These are the powers that were given to Congress. Now I want you to make note of this. Sometimes people say that the enumerated powers, Article 1, Section 8, are the powers given to the national government. That is not true. Sometimes I think it even says it in your book. That's not true. It was the enumerated powers are the powers given to the Congress only, the legislative branch. And if you click on the link to where it says enumerated powers on your, music students, what can I say? If you go ahead and you click on that link, it'll bring you to a web page that has a list of all the power. It actually lists the whole Constitution. And if you go to Article 1, Section 8, it lists all the powers that are given to the national government. It lists all the powers that are given to Congress. Specifically Congress. Ignore what I just said. Specifically Congress. It lists all those powers. Some of them are the power to declare war, the power to coin money, the power to set up postal roads, all kinds of powers that are given just to Congress. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to go ahead and pause me. And I want you to look down that list, and I want you to list at least 3 powers that were given just to Congress. Now, the cool thing about that webpage is that on the left-hand side of the webpage, what it has are the words in the Constitution, and on the right-hand side, they have the translation, what it means in like modern English, so we can understand it. So click on pause me right now, go click on that link, and I want you to go ahead and I want you to look up 3 powers that are given specifically to Congress. And you see on your lecture notes, there's an area of 1, 2, and 3 where I want you to write those powers in. Okay, so pause me. I'll wait. Okay, now you're back. I hope you went and did that. At the very end of Article 1, Section 8, there's something called the Necessary and Proper Clause. The Necessary and Proper Clause. And this is a really interesting part of the enumerated powers because what it says. In the Necessary and Proper Clause, you can read the wording for yourself because it's kind of complicated, quite frankly, the wording itself, and I just want to tell you what it means. Basically what the Necessary and Proper Clause says, and if you look on your notes, I have it listed there, is it says if Congress needs a power that is not mentioned above, like in the enumerated powers, if Congress needs a power that's not mentioned in the enumerated powers in order to carry out something that is mentioned, they have that power too. They have that power too. Okay? So one of the examples that we'll talk about in the next video is a decision that was made by the Supreme Court in what's called McCulloch versus Maryland, where the courts talked about this. But once again, the necessary and proper, there's all these powers listed in the enumerated powers. And then at the very end, there's something called the necessary and proper clause. And what the necessary and proper clause says is that if Congress needs a power that is not mentioned in all those powers, but it needs that power to carry out something that is mentioned, Congress has that power too. And that's really important. So we'll come back and we'll talk about what that means.